All right, if you are in here for decision-making and adoption, 10 frequently asked questions when considering adoption, you are in the correct space. You haven't had to move all night long. Man, when you put like 100 people in the sanctuary, there's nobody here. So, well, I'm glad you guys are here. Let's take a couple of minutes and maybe about 15 or so minutes. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I am not a social worker. I was in maybe your shoes about 2 years ago. My wife and I are on the cusp of ending our adoption process, completing our adoption process. About 2 years ago, we were asking a lot of these same questions, like where do we start? I'm not even sure what to do. What agency do I choose? Things like that. And so that's why we designed what we're doing tonight. I've been married 15 years. I got 3 daughters, and I'm getting ready to have a 4th. We got matched with a little girl. We're doing international adoption in China, and hopefully everything works out. We'll be traveling in about a month. So if you think about it, you can be praying for us and praying for her. You know, the difficulty in thinking through some of these questions is every situation is different. Every agency is different. Every path that you choose and journey that you're on is going to be a little bit different. So I apologize in advance if maybe some of these things are a little bit vague, but ultimately what I want to do is point you back to the experts that you saw in the lobby. That's why we had so many different ones, because I think just about with every organization or agency or ministry that's out there, we have people in our church at Maine, North, and LA campus that are working with them. So I want to encourage you, that is your best point of contact if you are considering and thinking about and want to move forward in the adoption or fostering process. Let me just go through, I came up with 10 questions that we were asking and several other people were asking us about how did you arrive at the conclusion of this is what we wanted to do, and we wanted to pursue adoption. And so I want to ask you these questions. You can jot these down. Hopefully there'll be some helpful information to help you discern whether or not you're called and want to move forward with adopting or foster care. The first one is this, just straight up, should I foster or adopt? This is something obviously that Dr. Moore talked a little bit about tonight. One of the things a lot of us don't understand is the difference between some of these. So I have a couple of things that I want to draw to your attention. Domestic adoption, the adoption of a child in America by a family residing in the United States. There are 101,840 children in America that are awaiting adoption. They are ready to be adopted now, but no one is there. There are 427,000 that are in the foster care system. And so that is domestic adoption. Obviously, international adoption. You live here in America and you are adopting from another country. Obviously, with the international adoption, there are extra work in a sense with immigration, with different kind of paperwork and things like that. However, there are 15 million what are called double orphans in the world. They've lost both parents, and they live in an orphanage, or they have absolutely no way to take care of themselves. For some of you, that may be the route. There are things called open adoption. An open adoption or cooperative adoption allows for some form of association and a relationship between the birth family, adoptees, and adoptive parents. When Dr. Moore's talking a lot about birth moms, there are lots of situations where you're foster care or you're in an adoption situation to where you can continue that relationship. And many people, some even within our church, are doing that as a gospel witness opportunity to that family and to that mother. So that may be something you want to be involved in. A closed adoption is an adoption in which there's no identifying information about the birth family or the adoptive family is shared, and there's no contact between birth parents and adoptive. This is more likely in international situations. For us, we'll probably never know why or how or what happened with our daughter who was abandoned at an intersection at 3 days old. That's the extent of the story that we'll be able to tell her in the years to come. And so for some of you, that's a good thing. That there may be some closure. That may be an easier situation for you to navigate. Obviously, foster care, a temporary arrangement in which other adults provide for the care of a child or children whose birth parents are unable or unwilling to care for them. The goal for a child in foster care is almost always reunification with the birth family. That's something to keep in mind, that there's always the possibility of the child going back to the family. But it could be changed to adoption. While foster care is temporary, adoption is permanent. Foster to adopt. This is one of the avenues that we thought we were going to go in at one time. It's a form of adoption in which a child is placed into a home as a foster child with the expectation that the child will become legally free or for adoption and be adopted by the foster parents. We have people in our church right now who have done this as well. Another one that's a big need, especially in Mecklenburg County and Charlotte, is what's known as respite care. I have a sense that we're going to see more and more families within our church who are going to become licensed foster parents. They're going to need other families and other parents who have been trained and who have been background checked so they can provide what's called respite care. Temporary care providing for a child in order to give the child's foster or adoptive parents time off or a little bit of rest from parenting. Maybe God is calling or nudging you in one of these directions. The second one is this: what are the qualifications? Now, once again, this is agency specific. All of them are different, but generally speaking, you have to be at least 21 years of age or older, 25 in some agencies. International adoptions often require you to be older, sometimes with a maximum age. I think for us in China right now, you cannot be 50 years older than the child's age at the time of adoption. Singles are allowed in many instances. Some require that you are married, so you have to just check into that for your specific agency. And often there are restrictions on your previous marriages or how many times or how the length of your divorces. A legal resident of the U.S., good physical and emotional health, no criminal record, felony convictions involving child abuse, spouse abuse, crime involving violence or DWI, extensive background checks, willing to submit to a thorough evaluation of your family and your home. And oftentimes, and most times, Christian agencies typically require some sort of statement of faith that you would adhere to or that you would affirm. All of these are going to be a pretty significant and a rigorous journey to go through to become a foster parent or to be qualified to adopt. In every situation, there's going to be some sort of completion of training. And most of them, there's going to be 30 hours up to 40 hours of training that you can do. Much of it's online. It can be reading. It can be classes that you have to attend as well. These are some of the qualifications. The third question is this: what if my spouse and I are not on the same page? Dr. Moore talked pretty significantly about this, and this is one of the things I was going to talk about because for a while, my wife and I were not on the same page. I was a little bit of the anomaly. I was the gas, and she was the brakes. I was the one who said, I think this is what we're supposed to do. Usually it's the women. And it took a little bit of time for us to get on the same page. It was a conversation piece that happened over and over throughout our 15 years of marriage. But ultimately, it was a sanctifying process that helped really refine our marriage and draw us closer to the gospel. I have 3 points of encouragement. Number one, and Dr. Moore said this, was sometimes it's good for us if we are the spouse who is considering or sensing a call to adopt. It's often great for us just to stop talking about it. I mean, just to kind of close our mouths and just let God work. Proverbs 27:15 says, a continual dripping of on a rainy day and a quarrelsome or nagging wife are alike. That can be for the husband as well, that oftentimes we continue to talk about it, and like he said, we leave little cute pictures here and there. That's not helpful at all. What is helpful is oftentimes to take a step back and to just be silent and let God do the work. The second thing I would say is also just to pray with urgency. Pray with urgency the same way that you sense God calling you into some sort of foster care or adoption, and you're thinking about a child, or maybe you know of a situation that you want to enter into. Pray with the same urgency that your spouse that God would change their heart to put you on the same page and that you would be unified in your decision. The third thing is this: is to just wait patiently. That often is a difficult thing for us to hear and a difficult thing for us to consider, but allow God to do his work. My wife and I were actually talking about this the other day, and it was such a moment kind of clarity that we thought, man, if we had more children earlier on, or if we had gone a different route as far as our family, I don't think that we would be in the situation that we were in. And he said, for us, it took us 15 years to get to the point to where we were on the same page. We both sensed that this is where God was calling us and that we were unified in our decision. And the great thing about it is while you're waiting, God can do some amazing things in your relationship and drawing you closer to each other, but especially closer to Him. So the fourth question is this: how long is the process? How long is the process, and what all is involved? I'll be honest, it is not for the faint of heart. It's not going to be a quick process. It does take a lot of time. We started the process in June of 2016, and obviously now we are in October of 2017. So by the time we pick up our daughter in China, it will be 17 months. That's a little bit longer maybe than some international adoptions, usually a shorter period of time for domestic adoptions or foster care. But like I said, all of these situations are different. Oftentimes, the application process itself can take several months, up to 6 months. My wife is insane in a good way, and she did all the paperwork in 2 weeks. Our agency was like, we've never had anybody finish the paperwork in 2 weeks. It normally takes a minimum of 6 weeks. And her philosophy was like, I don't want to do anything. I don't want them to ever be waiting on us. And so that was kind of our goal on the, along the way through it. You could have a 6-month application process, and then ultimately it could take even months and years after that until you have a referral or a match. I say that just so you're prepared. Oftentimes we hear these stories of like, hey, it's going to be really fast, and you're going to get a child, and you're going to get another child, and that's not always the case. We need to make sure that we are prepared for kind of a marathon. But the process looks something like this. Once again, agencies are all different. You attend an informational meeting. You complete a preliminary application, and then you have the initial review. You complete the second application. The first application is really short. The second one is the one that takes weeks and weeks and weeks. You participate in pre-placement assessment. This is where usually what is known as a home study, where they actually come in and they interview all the members of your family. They take stock of actually what your home is like, whether it's safe enough, whether it's adequate enough, and everything is basically written. A story is written about your family in about 30 pages. You can summarize everything you've ever done and everything that you are in about 30 pages. There are training courses that you'll have to complete, meeting with program coordinators and social workers. You got to take photos, fingerprinting, background checks. All of these are for international and foster care and domestic adoption. International is usually a little bit more lengthy. There are immigration paperwork, a dossier, which is pretty much every paperwork that you have completed, all compiled into one and then sent overseas. After that, you receive your referral for placement, and then hopefully, by God's grace, you would be matched. These are just some of the steps in the process. Maybe you've connected with some of the agencies tonight, and they have specific processes and what is step by step that you can expect. The fifth question is this. I don't really think I need to spend much time on this because Dr. Moore talked about this. Will it be risky, and are there unknowns, and what are some of the challenges? He said it way better than I could, that yes, the answer to all of those is yes. But when we understand the gospel and what's at stake, in the end, it will be worth it. Number 6, can I love a child that doesn't share my blood? This is a question that we hear a lot. I remember speaking with somebody back in the early summer, and he and his wife were considering adopting. He's like, I just don't know that I could love that child the same that I could with my own biological child. This is a question that comes up a lot. For us as Christians, though, thinking through the gospel, thinking of how God, through his son Jesus, adopted us into his family, that helps us. That gives us comfort, that gives us peace, that gives us assurance that yes, along the way we can do that. Adoptive parents with biological children and without will consistently tell you that they, in the end, love their adopted child as much as their biological child. Adoptive parents experience a full range of emotions, joys, and challenges with their adopted children, just as they do with their biological kids. All these situations are different, but what we have for us as believers is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I want to encourage you with that. The seventh question is this. This is one where it starts to get a little bit real. Can we afford it? Can we afford it? My simple question is no, probably not. That was kind of our response was, there's no way. I think that's one of the reasons why it took us 15 years. And looking back, we weren't necessarily saving for 15 years to get to this point, but that was always in our mind, especially international adoption. Man, we're never going to be able to afford that. It costs so much money. But I have to tell you, as embarrassed as I am, I had to spend a lot of time in repentance before God that he could do it. He could very easily provide for us, and he has done just that to the penny. If he calls you to adopt, he's going to provide. It's the number one reason why most couples don't pursue it. Because it can be expensive. Domestic and international adoptions can range anywhere from about $28,000 to about $40,000, which sounds, for most of us, we're like, I don't have that in my bank account. But if God's calling you to do it, he will provide the money. There are other options as well. Foster instead of adopting, there's almost no cost to that. If you're willing to become a foster parent, for the most part, there's very little cost in doing that. Foster to adopt, there's minimal cost in that as well. Several of the agencies out here tonight, they can do that, and many of them, there are government assistance that can help you out along the way. We have families in our church who have done all of these, and if you're thinking, man, I'd like to do that, or I'd like to be able to talk to someone who's been down that road, we would love to connect you with them. But so there are ways God can provide, but there are also ways in the foster care system where you can become a foster parent or maybe foster to adopt, where there is minimal charge and sometimes no charge at all. Are there grants? This is number 8. Are there grants and other ways to raise money? Yes. You pinch pennies. You save. You check on your employer benefits. You apply for grants. My wife's job in our process was doing all the paperwork for us to the application and the dossier and all those things. My job was to fill out the grant applications. So for those of you that may be not that far out of college, it was like applying for scholarships over and over. And it took me about 2 weeks, and I filled out 11 grant applications. Probably took me about 30 hours. But I'm thankful to say that God answered so many prayers through that time, and we received about half of those grants, which I was astounded. I was shocked. That happened because of, I believe, a lot of time spent on our knees in prayer, and so I'm thankful for that. You can scour the internet for asking about financing adoption. There's also a really, really good book that I would recommend that you read. We're kind of pretty frugal in our home, and we try to live within our means. There's a book called You Can Adopt Without Debt. So some of you that are thinking about this, but you know that money may be the issue that keeps you away from it. It's called You Can Adopt Without Debt by Julie Gum. I would highly recommend that book. Ideas about fundraising and ideas about saving and ideas about applying for grants. There's so many resources in that book. You can get it on Amazon for about $12. Number 9, we're uncertain, so what should we do? We're uncertain, so what should we do? I would encourage you to pray, and not just pray separately, but actually pray together, that God would unify your hearts and your minds and that you would move in the same direction. Our goal tonight is to not try to convince you that you are to do this or you are called to do this, because oftentimes we're uncertain, and so we wonder, what in the world should we do? I would encourage you to wait. For us, it took 15 years. I look back now, and this is the exact right timing that God had for us. Make sure that you're talking to each other. Oftentimes during this situation, we think, well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to bring it up. Make sure that there are clear communication between you. Find someone else in our church. We have about 35 families between main campus and North Campus and our Latin American campus who have adopted or foster care in all different scenarios. We would love to connect you with those people. They can tell you exactly what their situation was like. So make sure that you ask some of our pastors on staff. Read and educate yourself, but then eventually make sure that you try to connect with an agency. Number 10, then the last one is this. We want to move forward. Now what should we do? Has God called you to adopt? Has God called you to foster? These are the questions that you have to answer between you and your spouse. Has God called you to adopt at this time? is now the right time for us to pursue this? As a married couple, if both of you can answer those two questions in the affirmative, I would encourage you to keep praying. Don't stop praying because you're on the same page. We've probably done more prayer. We've probably spent more time in prayer, my wife and I, since we have received our match and now that we know who our daughter is going to be. But I want to encourage you to keep praying. Explore different options. You may think, hey, I want to foster, and that's all I want to do. But God may have a different plan, or he may lay something on your heart that moves you in a completely different direction. Talk to other people. Connect with agencies. That's why we had 10 different people here tonight, because we want to connect you with people who are experts in the area who can help you move forward in your orphan care, whether it's foster or adoption care. The next thing I would encourage you to do is just about every one of these agencies have information meetings, usually once a month or maybe every other month. Hopefully tonight you've been able to gather some of that information. That was where it all started for us. My wife and I went with one of the agencies that were out in the lobby. We walked into the meeting not having a clue what we wanted to do, thinking, I think we're going to adopt, but I'm not really sure. Domestic, international, I don't know. And when it came time to say, okay, if you're going to domestic, go over here in this room. International, you guys go over here and this room. We both looked at each other and said, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And for whatever reason, at that time, we chose international. And by the time that we left that night, it was like the fog had been lifted, and we said, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? Well, I asked you first. What do you think? We went back and forth. And then finally, like, I think this is it. And we knew at that moment that this is what God had called us to do. Oftentimes, we wait and we continue to seek guidance and discernment. But for some of us, especially if we're in this boat, we just have to obey. I mean, we just have to say yes, and we have to move forward in that process. I want to thank you guys for being here. I know we've gone a little bit over on time. I'd love to pray for you guys, and maybe one last time on your way out tonight, you can connect with somebody at the booth. Let's pray. Father, thank you for our time together. Thank you for the words from Dr. Moore. God, I pray that you would give us more than anything, a heart for the gospel, but also how we can take the gospel to these children and to these families. God, whether it's right here in Charlotte, whether it's halfway around the world, God, help us to live out the gospel. God, I pray that you would raise up families within our church who are going to support these families, who are going to financially assist them, who are going to offer respite care and foster care and adopt internationally. God, because ultimately we want to glorify you in all that we do. God, we thank you for what you're going to do in the next weeks and months and even years because of what has happened here tonight. We give you the glory for it. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.